I want to welcome you all to the final event in our series of virtual conversations highlighting the role of entrepreneurs driving innovation in post-secondary education. Some of you may have joined our previous events last fall on co-creating education and strategies for building programs with learners at the center, or creating and scaling individualized pathways. But if you didn't, don't worry, this is a new conversation. And while we will pull on some of the same themes, we hope this conversation adds new perspective as well. And the goal of today's event is to, and in particular the breakout sessions in the second half, is to have a more action-oriented conversation. And so today's event title is Unlocking Potential, Operationalizing a New Era of Individualized Education. So we will go over just that. How do we take the concepts of innovation, learner-centric design, and individualized pathways to create new solutions that allow all learners to reach their potential? So we'll start with a discussion on what it means to be individualized and why that's important in education, before moving into two panel conversations with education leaders and funders who have experience prioritizing learner input and individual needs in their program design. In the second hour of the event, we will invite all of those that wish to stay online to join smaller breakout conversations to brainstorm and workshop new solutions of your own at your institutions with peers. So we hope this event will foster collaboration among this community of education leaders, as well as spark new ideas. And we hope that CKF can be a resource for partnering on those ideas in the future. So we're so excited that so many of you have joined us today. And before we get started, I will just do a little bit of housekeeping and tips to make this conversation productive. So by now, we're all more than familiar with Zoom, so you'll notice that we are in Zoom meeting format. So we just ask that that means everyone engage respectfully throughout the conversation. We'll be spotlighting speakers as their panels come up, and just ask that everybody who's not speaking keep their mics muted and use the chat function while we're in this large group and until we get into the breakouts. If you are not seeing my face really big and you're still seeing a bunch of tiny little boxes, you might just need to change your view. So go up into the right-hand corner and click on view and change to speaker view. And it won't be my face the whole time. So if you've got any tech questions or issues with that, you can chat directly myself or Jennifer Philippi, who is managing the behind the scenes of the event. So if you have any trouble anytime throughout the event, just let one of us know. And then with that, I will turn it over to CKF's Executive Director, Ryan Stowers, for a conversation with Todd Rose, and they will tell you a little bit more about the why behind this event. Ryan?
Thanks so much, Cheyenne. It's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to be joined by a really good friend, Todd Rose. And let me just introduce Todd, and then I'll provide some context for the conversation, and then jump into some questions for Todd. But Todd is the co-founder and president of Populous. Populous is a think tank committed to ensuring that all people have the opportunity to pursue fulfilling lives in a thriving society. Pretty awesome area to focus on and work to be involved with. Todd is also the best-selling author of Dark Horse. Sorry, I'm gonna do some real publicity here. Dark Horse, The End of Average, and his newest book, hot off the press, Collective Illusions. So if you haven't read any of Todd's books, I highly recommend them. I have not read his newest one yet, other than some early drafts, but I'm really excited to dig in, and we're going to try to pull some themes out of his books in the conversation today. Todd is also a longtime partner of the Stand Together community and the Charles Koch Foundation, and we're just honored to have him with us today. So just for context, the Charles Koch Foundation, we're really focused on stimulating movements that will remove the barriers that are preventing people from reaching their potential. And as we all know, the education space has created, as an institution in society, it's created a lot of barriers in people's lives, preventing them from reaching that potential. And so today's focus, as Cheyenne spelled out, is on post-secondary ed. And I think we're all here because we recognize the need for change in post-secondary ed. And we can make that happen from our perspective through a more learner-centered program design. By incorporating learner voice, it requires valuing and prioritizing the input of learners as perhaps the most critical input to consider. And recognizing that, ironically, it's been the input that's probably been most neglected or forgotten in the past. And so we really want to pull some of those themes out today. Let me just jump to it because we want to hear from Todd. So Todd, as we get into this, before we kind of unpack what action looks like, let's take a step back. When we say individualized, what does it, from your perspective, what does it mean to take an individualized approach?
Well, first, thanks for having me. It's always great to be here and to see you. From my perspective, it's the individualized approach rests on one big assumption that I think we all take for granted now, which is that people's distinctiveness actually matters, right? It's not noise, it's not error, it's something to actually design for, and that people's distinctiveness is ultimately part of their own fulfillment, self-actualization, but also the greatest contribution that they're going to make in society. So we take it seriously. And this is not, this sounds obvious now, but most of our systems for 100 years have been designed assuming individuality actually doesn't really matter, right? These standardized systems. And you've seen this change in this science I've been a part of called the science of individuality. We've seen this everywhere we've looked. You know, these one-size-fits-all systems aren't delivering, whether it's in cancer treatment or nutrition, and then yes, in education and in the development of people's potential. What I would say real quick is, I think it's worth pointing out that sort of implicit in the assumption we're all making that we need to change the system to be more individualized is that most of us are also making another assumption about what human potential is like. And in the existing system we have that's standardized, it rests on an assumption of what I would call like the talented 10th, right? That actually talent is a bell curve, and that becomes, in a democratic system, the goal is not developing everyone's potential because you don't think everybody has potential. It's about having as fair of a system to select the people that deserve more resources, right? And so I think most of us reject that now. We know most of the public rejects that now. So I just want to point that out, that we think that most everybody has something to contribute. Everybody does. And that their individuality matters. And if that's true, then all that's left when we rethink what we're doing in education is, okay, the existing system does not accomplish that. So how do we go about getting to a more individualized system capable of developing the full potential of every person? And to me, that's the most important question right now, because there's really only two ways you can do this, right? You can pull together the best and brightest and let them make decisions about what this new system should be like, and try to implement that, which to me is just another standardized system. Or you go the other way and bet the farm from a bottom-up standpoint, both centering learner voices and also expanding the number of people who can actually contribute to this new system.
Yeah, no, that's really important. You touched on this, Todd. So let's dig a little deeper. I mean, what would, from your perspective, I mean, what would happen, or what are the risks if we try to find that individualization from the top down? I mean, what are the costs of doing it that way?
Like, this is actually the thing that sort of terrifies me and why I wanted to call it out. So, you know, okay, individuality matters. Everybody's got something to contribute, fine. But not appreciating that into this, we are accepting a bottom-up approach as the only way to do it. Because think about, like, at best, if you try to top down this, at best, you are just not going to be very effective, because like it would require that I actually understand the individuality of every person participating in the system with enough fidelity to design something that would work, right? Like, in the same way that, like, we know free markets work because we stopped pretending that there was some brilliant person who could understand all of the mechanisms, right? Like, in the same way here, it's like, if we accept the assumptions of top down, which are sort of part and parcel of the standardized system that we are rejecting now, I think at best it's going to be ineffective, but at worst, like the thing that really makes me nervous is this will become the most dystopian hyper control system that you could have imagined. Because at least in a standardized system, you kind of know you're being controlled. Like you can feel it, right? It's just brute force and you know it doesn't quite fit for you. But like the problem is if we accept that basically the system knows more about you than you do, and you are like a passive participant, right? Then that system, yeah, it can literally manipulate the things you do, the things you learn, the sequence with which you learn it, ultimately imbuing you with values that you may not have actually held yourself. And unlike in a standardized system where you will know you were manipulated, you will actually think it. You will call it personalization and think this was always you. So I think it's really, really important that to get the most out of this new system, you have to start not just by trying to design something for and do things to people, but empowering people to actually make more choices for themselves. And I don't see another way to get to the place that we want to be.
Yeah, no, this is so critical. I was at an event earlier this week talking to entrepreneurs in the ed space, and you can see just because of the system we all came through, this is kind of the tendency we have where we think we can come up with the silver bullet or the solution, and there's so much risk in continuing to think that way. We've seen the way that it can either destroy lives or set people up for failure or suboptimal results, but in the way that you described it, the costs and the risks are even higher. Thanks for unpacking that, Todd. So you said that there's no such thing as an average learner, and you've been a big proponent of this. And frankly, we've learned a lot from you on this topic, and I think it's helped to shape the way we think about the work that we're doing. What do you mean by that, and how do you scale an individualized approach to learning?
Yeah. So first of all, like what's interesting, and it's just part of the habit we've gotten into accepting average-based systems, is that we think when we acknowledge individuality that it must mean chaos. And like we think that you get scale through depersonalization as if it's the only way. But it's important to recognize that our technologies have flipped that script. We can do something that we couldn't do 50 years ago, which is we now get scale through personalization, right? Through individualization. And this is true. I'll give you one concrete example, and we'll come back to the in terms of no average. It sounds like a bumper sticker. It really does, like a slogan. Like, but what I'm saying is if it, I guess I'll do it like this. As I say in my book, The End of Average, right? Like, no, like we are unique human beings and it matters. And like, so when we take categories and we think they describe the individuals in those categories, we found time and time again, it doesn't. At best, it barely describes some of them. Sometimes it literally, the average-based description, like relates to nobody in the group. It's pretty crazy. And once we've gotten past that, we've actually been able to make pretty good progress. So I'm gonna give you one example that's not in education about what I mean by scale through individualization, and then we can talk about what goes into the education system. So in the realm of nutrition, some of my colleagues in Israel, so with metabolic health issues, right, which is a huge problem in the US, diabetes, pre-diabetes, and that kind of space, we have relied on the glycemic index for a long time to tell us, eat this food and it will increase your blood sugar this much, right? Well, the glycemic index is entirely based on group averages. And my colleagues in Israel decided to apply this new science to say, well, first of all, how many people around the world actually respond the way the glycemic index says they should? Turns out, out of hundreds of thousands of people studied, 0. Right? Now, you could say, well, shoot, like, what does that mean? Is that just this chaos, right? Everyone's a snowflake. There's nothing you can do. Turns out the exact opposite is true. What they were able to do is use some clever machine learning and other things to create hyper individualized predictions based on like gut biome, deep blood work. I participated in it. And this is the spoiler alert for me. That was so crazy. So diabetes runs in my family. I want to avoid it like the plague. My nutritionist 20 years ago told me grapefruit is magical. Like and on average, it actually has some interesting properties in regulating blood sugar. So for most of my adult life, I have had a half a grapefruit every morning, right? Thinking that I was doing right by myself. So I get my results back And they created a company out of this called Day 2. Anybody can do it. I don't have any stock in it or anything, but just full disclosure there, right? I'm fine. Out of all the foods that I could eat, grapefruit elevates my blood sugar more than anything. It's actually worse for my blood sugar than chocolate cake. And like, what was interesting is my wife did it, and she has a completely different profile. And in fact, for me, the glycemic index was wrong 65% of the time. Now, what's interesting, okay, so what they've been able to do is give me the knowledge I need to make better metabolic decisions, right, for my own health. And now I have actually been able to take control of that in a way that it wasn't possible before. Meanwhile, every other individual can do it through this technology. So we've been able to scale and optimize population level metabolic health through individuality, right? Not around it. Now, if we come back to education and we accept the idea that there's no one size fits all solution, we're all distinct, our distinctiveness matters, but we want to scale that kind of system, I think it has at least 3 things, right? The first is you have to design flexibility into the system. That seems obvious, but education is the last industry that still incentivizes average-based design. Like it's insane, right? So embedding flexibility everywhere, which creates more choice points, more options for people, is like step 1, and it has to be there. The second is we are not trying to program all the responsiveness to individuality into the system, right? That ends up with a system that knows learners more than they know themselves, and it's very dangerous. And I think that becomes a control system in a hurry. So focusing on the human relationship, right? So the mentoring, the teaching, I know that seems obvious, but we don't want individualized education to become synonymous with isolation and sitting in front of a computer. The last thing, and core to what we're talking about today, is that at the end of the day, arguably nobody knows me better than I know myself. I say arguably because we don't really help kids and adults learn who they are. But at the end of the day, I need to be able to have the choices and be able to make those choices for myself. Of course, with guidance and support, but there's no other way to get to a scaled system that actually accommodates the full range of individuality without focusing on the student themselves. And I will say, just lastly, this all sounds new. Our ability to do it is new in terms of the scientific know-how and the technology, but this instinct to want to individualize and want to devolve power away from centralized authority and giving more people more choices is an age-old debate. And one of my favorite things, I used to be a professor at Harvard. Now I'm just a reformed academic, but Charles Eliot, one of the early presidents of Harvard, way back when, came over from MIT and decided he was going to gut this standardized curriculum, and he made every course an elective, and he shortened the degree to 3 years. And he said, "Are you kidding me? Are you telling me if a student understands what they care about and they have a good mentor, you're telling me they don't know how to pick the right classes and they don't know how to this? And if you tie it closely to the economy and employers, like this is a much easier." So it was amazing. And then the rest of the Ivy Leagues revolted, like flat out revolted. They said, "Look, you're killing the golden goose here," right? And so they forced him back. They threatened to kick Harvard out of the Ivy Leagues, and they forced them back. And the compromise, no kidding, was the major-minor system. We said, we're still going to standardize everything, but we'll give you that little choice, right? We'll give you a little bit of choice. You have a major and a minor. So look, we've had this impulse to do this, right? And now the difference is we can actually do it. And it would be a real shame if we carry over legacy assumptions into a new environment that allows us to do so much more.
Your metaphor on the nutrition side is so empowering when you apply it in the education context. I mean, you think about the information about grapefruit. It didn't force you to do something. It just gave you the information that you needed in order to make an adjustment based on who you are. And it's incredible. And you pointed out also the system hasn't done a very good job about helping us learn who we are. I wanted to put an exclamation point on that. That is, I think, core to what we're talking about here, folks. I think Todd just nailed it. I think that is from our perspective, the biggest gap in the status quo and how we need to think and act differently moving forward. We've got to help people understand who they are, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what their aptitudes are, and then help them base their pathway, their learning on who they are. So I just wanted to, Todd said it, I just wanted to add the exclamation mark. So Todd, you just wrote this new book, Collective Illusions. I want to pivot a little bit. It's all related, but how does the concept of collective illusions, what you've just written about, apply in this context?
Yeah, so let me give a definition, and I'll tell you why this matters. So collective illusions are basically social lies, right? They happen in situations where a majority in a group ends up going along with something that they don't privately agree with, only because they incorrectly believe that the majority in the group actually does believe it, right? And as a result, entire groups can end up doing things that almost nobody really wanted. Now, what's crazy about that is you would imagine that kind of systematic misunderstanding would be rare, but at Populism, I think this is what we study for a living, and it is shocking, in part due to social media and some other things. We are fantastically wrong about the majority's opinion in almost everything that matters. And what's terrible about that is our desire to conform, right? We like to be with the group, not against it. And so, like, if we're right about the group, it just becomes groupthink. That's bad enough. But in this case, because we're wrong about the group, our behavior sustains and even implements something that we don't even want. And so the reason I bring this up is, while we found collective illusions in a lot of places that matter, the kind of country we want to live in, the kind of lives we want to live, nowhere have we found bigger illusions than in what people want out of education. Like, so basically, in a nutshell, it's this. The things we're talking about right now are the desires of a supermajority of Americans across all demographics. All demographics. You can't cut the data in a way that finds any group where a majority actually wants the status quo. However, they are thoroughly convinced that they are in the minority, that the vast majority of people are more or less fine with the existing system. And the problem is, history has shown us when a society is operating under a collective illusion, social change is next to impossible, right? Because the very people who would be for the change are actively working against it at worst, or at least being silent about their desires at best. And so part of our work is to shatter those illusions and unlock the possibility of helping to drive change. But that's only one side of the coin, right? Like, it's not enough to recognize our shared values or shared desires for a different kind of education system. That can create hope, but all social change happens not out of fear or hope, but on the back of rising expectations, right? And right now, to convert hope into expectation requires me to see solutions, right, that embody those values, and that those are in short supply. And I think it's why I was excited to come and talk today. Is it's the people right here, the entrepreneurs that are doing this work, and like, yeah, it might not be the single solution to everything, but do not underestimate the role that your solutions play, not just in solving a problem, but in converting hope into expectation on the part of the public, allowing them to reveal their shared values for the future of education, which will create enormous pressure on this system to change.
Wow. I was going to ask another question, but I think we should probably, that nailed it. My last question was, what advice would you give, Todd, to education entrepreneurs watching? I think you just did it, but would you add anything?
Yeah, I would say this. Look, just briefly, what I can tell you beyond any reasonable doubt is that the things that you're working toward, the American public wants. They want. We have more data on private opinion about education than probably anybody in the country, I would argue. They want it. They don't realize that most people are there with them. And again, as we build these solutions, it's really important not to put too much pressure on y'all, but like, what can hold this back? If we don't get this right, if we don't stay true to principles, the things we've talked about, we take the shortcuts, we build a system that knows more about kids. it becomes control, whatever, right? What will happen is this will hold back progress for decades because people will say, listen, we already tried this, right? We tried it, it doesn't work, right? So I think it's really important like that we think clearly about the assumptions we're making, about the goals that we're striving for, and work hard to provide the public with solutions that embody the values they have.
Todd, thank you so much. So inspiring, so incredibly applicable to all that we're trying to focus on here. This couldn't have gone better. And folks, we were fortunate. Todd is extremely busy with his new book right now, so we were lucky to get him. And I know there were a few questions posed to Todd in the chat. We'll make sure that those questions get to Todd, and we'll follow up with responses. Thanks so much for your time, Todd. Thanks for being here. And Cheyenne, we'll turn the time back over to you.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Todd. And thank you, Ryan. I love hearing from Todd. I usually end up leaving the conversation, entering a deep mode of self-reflection and societal reflection for the next few hours. So that's where I'll be. But, and if you haven't already, I highly recommend picking up Collective Illusions. We will try to get the link to the data, like Ryan said, and follow up on the data and a link to the book in the chat and in the post-event email. And I also want to let everybody know, especially for those who may have joined a few minutes late, that this conversation is being recorded, not the breakouts, but we will record the first hour in the panels and circulate it in a post-event email, so you will have the chance to hear the full conversation. So with that, I will turn it over to the next panel to talk about what this looks like in action. Andy Tonsing, CKF's Director of Post-Secondary Education, will introduce our panelists, and I'll turn it over to you to moderate the conversation, Andy.
Thanks, Cheyenne. And I do think it's just to pause real quick at something that Todd and Ryan said, just really center us again on why we're all here and why we're talking about this topic of learner voice. Right? It's really to help the people we want to serve, learners, discover who they are so they can unlock their potential. Right? That's why we're continuing this conversation, and excited to take that from the why to the actual doers, the people who are actually implementing this in their day-to-day to transform the lives of learners. And so we have that on our panel. We have 3 leaders who are innovatively centering learner voice in 3 very different types of institutions. And so the goal here is to see what it actually looks like in action, and what worked and what, of course, didn't work well. And so to get started, I'd like to maybe have each of our panelists do a quick intro of your name, your institution, and briefly share what learner voice means in your particular context. Maybe we'll go, because this is the order of my screen, Erica, Alan, and Sheila.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Erica Barrero. I work for Central New Mexico Community College in Albuquerque, and I serve as the Future of Work Strategist there, which is a pretty cool title to hold.
Maybe briefly share as well how you sort of define learner voice.
Sorry. So I think, what comes to mind for me in terms of learner voice is that a little bit what we heard this just a bit ago, that there is no single learner voice, right? That there's no kind of monolith that we can turn to that defines what learner voice is, and that it's diverse. But I will say we're really focusing right now on the working learner voice in our context.
Thank you. Maybe I'll go next. I'm Alan Drimmer. I'm the president at Cleary University. Cleary is a small liberal arts college in Michigan. I've been very interested in learner voice for a long time. Most of my career, I've been a provost, and a provost is responsible for student retention and student satisfaction, and understanding the needs and the wants of learners is a big driver of why they stay in school. And why they go on to do great things in their lives. So that's been a big driver for me.
Hi, everyone. Sheila Saram. I'm the CEO and founder of BASTA. We are a nonprofit closing the employment gap specifically for first-generation college students of color. We've been around for a little over 5 years. We work with students predominantly attending city and state colleges. And we have an 80% success rate. So 80% of young people who complete our programs go on to secure career pathway jobs. And I think the key to our work is that we start the journey with young people by codifying and supporting them in answering the questions, Who am I? What are my skills, strengths, interests, and drivers? And how do those align to the world of work? I just got a chat. There's an alum, a Basta alum on this call, and I see her nodding. So that's really exciting. I do think that's the key to our success. The young people we work with are no different than their peers, but we really start with who are you and what can your contributions be based on what you care about.
That's awesome. One of your alums is here. It's a small world. Cool. Well, next, I think we'll quickly preview some of the broad practices for incorporating learner voice that we identified in research with Common Group last year, just to sort of anchor us for the next part of the conversation. Can everyone see that? Great. So we really just hope this, everybody's in a different part of their journey in terms of implementing learner voice. We hope it sort of helps demonstrate that this process looks very different depending on the institution and the needs of the learners that you're trying to serve, right? And so now I'd like to go back to the panelists, and if you could explain a little bit about how each of you are implementing learner voice best practices within your institutions, maybe share an example or two of what this looks like and what has been the result. I'll kind of throw that up as a jump ball, whoever wants to start off.
Well, I can start, I guess. First of all, I'd say that we, like everybody that touches higher education as a school or as a vendor or as a startup, we all care about students, and tapping into this notion of empathy and understanding of what the student's going through is like very natural to us, I think. And I also think we can learn a lot from design thinking. That's how design thinking starts. And so I think there's a lot of lessons there. One of the big things you do in design thinking is you listen. So sometimes instead of preaching at people, I like to show staff what students are actually saying. So for example, we had a board meeting coming up, and we're going to be having a panel of students from different segments. As Erica was talking about, there's different segments. She's focusing on the working adult, and that's one of our segments too. But we're going to video it, and then we're going to show it to the staff. So instead of me preaching at people, we're going to show people what students are actually saying, and try to get them to listen and grapple with it. Another thing we're trying to do is to measure, and I think most organizations have some kind of student satisfaction survey or something like that. We've had success with something called the Net Promoter Score, which is great because it's very simple. It just asks a person, would you recommend a friend? And then why or why not? So a closed-ended and an open-ended question, not 27 questions and all this stuff, and not embedding that one question in a 27-question survey, just one, 2 questions. Would you recommend a friend? Why or why not? And it turns out that, and this has been validated all over so many different organizations, you get a lot of good data there. And so from that, learning things about what's going right and what's going not so right in the organization, and parsing that out and asking people to follow up on it has been another good way to get people to listen. And then actually measuring, there's a way to score it using that technique. And then just one other thing that we've used, and I would say most schools have something like this, and some kind of tapping into an assessment infrastructure that organizations already have. So most organizations already try to assess what students are feeling and saying. But a lot of times that data gets consumed by small constituencies, little groups of faculty, tenure committee, board, But so a lot of us have great information. We just need to recognize it and kind of raise it up, elevate it, and circulate it within the organization. But that's something that's right there at our fingertips. We could just use it. Thanks.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it highlights too that learner voice really touches on sort of a broad range of things, whether it's the culture of the institution itself, but also very tangible. It's measurements and how you understand and use it, which is great. Erica, you want to go next?
Sure. So a couple of ways that our institution is applying learner voice is we are celebrating learner stories. So every week we have what's called Newslink. It goes out to all employees, and it always has a story of one of our students, right? And it's a, very diverse mixture of, the different types of students that we have, even like what programs they've completed, non-credit, credit. And for me, it really just centers why we come to work every day and who we are serving. And so that's something that we're doing. We also have engaged our students in testing our experiences that they have as secret shoppers, right? So we have students that do certain tasks and activities, whether it's trying something out on our website, going through an experience with our welcome center of asking questions, and we get feedback from those experiences that inform how we are training our staff, how we are designing things. Our college is also a founding partner in Unmuddle, which is basically it's a skills to job workforce marketplace. And we work with other community colleges in that learning marketplace. And one of the reasons I was really attracted to being a part of Unmuddle is that the entire concept and design was actually informed by learner voice. And so they even have like a learner advisory board that provides ongoing feedback. So those are some of the ways that we're tapping into that learner voice.
That's great, thank you. And it also, one of your examples highlighted one of the points on the best practices for celebrating learner stories, right? Really the importance of celebrating those wins and understanding, getting everybody sort of bought into why we're doing the work in the day-to-day. So that, great. And then we'll move on to Sheila.
Yeah, so I think drawing on something Alan said earlier, this sort of notion of user-centered design. So I think in our first couple of years, BASTA was really focused on studying first-generation college students and understanding what is the journey of, who am I, what do I care about, how does that align to the world of work, and how do I actually successfully interview for the jobs I want? How can we map that so that we're meeting young people where they are? Because what we found was, Erica might come to us second semester of her senior year and say, listen, I'm a first-generation college student. I've been working at 100 hours a week while I've been in college. I picked journalism as my major 4 years ago. I don't really know why, I don't know, right, what I want to do next. And Alan might come to us and say, I've always wanted to work in finance. I went to this finance-centered college. I did an internship, but I can't seem to get interviews with my resume. Those young people are in very different places. And we believe our job is to meet them where they are. And so, instead of sort of picking up BASTA and franchising it and building it everywhere, we spent a couple of years really codifying that journey roadmap. So this goes a little bit against what Todd was saying, because we have codified a journey roadmap. So if you want to participate in BASTA, you do have to sort of be willing to go on this journey with us, but we recognize that we cannot dictate your starting point, and we have to meet you where you are to get to the outcome that you want in the time that you want it. So that's sort of, that's how we've codified this work. And it's so interesting because, I think the flip of this is using sort of skill-based models. And there's so many sophisticated instruments now. You could drill down into an individual zip code and figure out what skills are in demand in that zip code. The challenge is that if you just go to an individual and you say, hey, Andy, you live in this zip code, there's a lot of need for Salesforce administrators in that zip code. If I haven't figured out who you are and what unlocks you, I'm going to be like, okay, thanks. And then I'm just going to, thank you politely and not act on it. So I think even in this world where we can really drill down to just the sort of the block you live on to tell you what skills you need, if we don't prioritize understanding the individual, we cannot connect those dots for folks. So, I think our very sophisticated measures for understanding skill gaps in various communities almost amplifies our need to better understand individuals so we can connect those dots.
That's great. And I honestly probably could have used BASTA when I was in college as well. That's awesome. These are all really good examples of like different instantiations of learner voice for very different learner populations and in different institutions. But we should also probably talk about not only what's worked well, but the challenges you faced along the way. Right, so let's maybe Leslie briefly put up the slide that summarizes some of the main barriers to implementing learner voice that we found in our research with Common Group. And all the attendees today have also sort of shared what your biggest barriers are. And so the three that sort of came up most frequently are legacy processes, lacking the infrastructure to implement learner voice, and competing priorities with learner voice as well. And so to kick it back over to the panelists, would like just your sort of reactions to this. What rings true or not, and the barriers that you faced in your own stories. Maybe we'll jump with Sheila.
Yeah. You know, I think FOSTA sits at the intersection of two disparate systems, hiring and higher ed. Unfortunately, they're disparate. And sometimes the way I describe that, and Alan, it sounds like that is not the case where you are, but I think if you ask a room of first generation college students, why did you go to college? Almost unanimously, the answer will be to get a great job. But if you sit a room of professors in a room and you say, why do you teach? I don't think that their immediate answer is to help young people get a good job. And I think there's almost there's a little bit of tension right now on our institutions of higher ed and their purpose and why young people are attending college. And so that just means we haven't integrated career readiness into the college journey in a really meaningful way when we want to account for first generation college students who maybe don't come into college with the same knowledge as their peers about what jobs are out there and what's in the job market. I see this sort of like conversation about KFC happening in the chat, and I would agree, like even if we think about the metabolic example that Todd gave, someone may be able to tell you like, you should eat chicken, you know, because that matches your metabolic rate. But if KFC is saying they have chicken and no one's saying, but the chicken at KFC is not really good chicken, and it's like really fried chicken, don't eat that chicken, you know, someone might just go eat KFC every day. So I do think there's a role for our institutions to play in bringing knowledge to bear. And I don't know if we can just trust individuals and the market without some intermediary providing some connective tissue to make sense of information. So I just went a little bit everywhere and came back, but that's my that sort of connective tissue I think is sometimes missing between the purpose of college from a student's perspective and then a professor's perspective.
That's great.
Well,
Well, go ahead. Sorry, Alan.
One thing I was going to say is just that I think these barriers, these are awesome. And I think this does capture a lot of what prevents organizations from doing more with learner voice. One observation I've had is that sometimes it's really hard to figure out what learner voice is, because depending on the segment, some are more inclined to tell you than others. And so what I found is that like we're working adults, they'll tell you, because guess what? And I'll use myself as an example. Like I have no problem sharing my voice if a line is long at the supermarket, you know, and if Verizon gets my bill wrong, but an 18-year-old undergraduate, you know, who's never been away from home, they might not be as likely to share their voice with us. So you got to work at really getting it. So if you just listen to the noisy, loud people, you might miss some things too. So I think there's a certain, it's complicated. I don't think there's an easy way to do it, but sometimes you gotta, just like with human beings, you gotta, to figure out what people really think, you gotta work at it.
And I'll jump into that. There seems to be a little bit of a theme between some of what the points are that are being made. And it's interesting because I actually know in our institution, we have a lot of working adults that that don't feel comfortable stating their voice because of their background, because they haven't been successful in previous schooling experiences, because of other types of things. So I think it is really valuable to think about how do we structure opportunities for learner voice to actually engage meaningfully. And so I think that sometimes it was interesting to me that there was an area up there that really spoke to the idea of, does your institution value learner voice? And I think it's really easy for us to say yes, because our institutions are organized to support learners, right? And so we have that automatic kind of inclination to say, of course we value learner voice, like everything we do is for the learner. And yet when you look at our processes and how we are actually codifying that, right, in ways that engage learners meaningfully, I think that it's not there. So when I think about one of the biggest areas of challenge that we have in terms of bringing learner voice, it's actually engaging in meaningful ways and ways that we also, like what Todd was saying earlier, assume that the learner knows themselves best and that they do have knowledge and insight that we need to listen to as we design their learning experiences.
It's great. I think it makes me think, you know, all of your answers sort of back to the 6 best practices, one of them being acknowledge your assumptions, right? If you assume what the learner wants, or assume you're really hearing the voices of everybody, Alan, your point, or assume that, you know, there's a certain level of knowledge, right? You're going to miss a lot. And so really trying to go back through and understanding yourselves, right? And what your assumptions and questions are at the beginning. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us and sharing your experience. But I'd like to wrap up, if you could all share sort of one piece of advice you'd like to leave with the audience today as they continue on their own learner voice journeys.
I mean, I'll go. My advice would be just keep working at it. And I'll just tell one quick story, and I wasn't going to tell this, but it happened this morning. As much as I talk about learner voice in my organization, we had a meeting today, and we're just trying to decide how our phone tree should work. And we went through, and everybody said, well, the phone tree should take people to enrollment and financial aid and the bookstore and all this. Nobody said the phone tree should actually take somebody to an academic advisor or to a faculty member who can help them with school. And like, I don't know. So, but that's okay. It happens. But I mean, we just got to keep working at it in all the different ways that are authentic to our institutions.
Yeah, I think if the goal of sort of really hearing learner voice is to solve a problem, my advice would be to bring folks from very different backgrounds to the table as you're hearing, as you're doing interviews, as you're hearing student voice, and see where you start to have shared pattern recognition. To Andy's point around testing assumptions.
And she's discontinued her methylphenidate for ADD. So between
I think one of the pieces of advice is thinking about what are the barriers to learners actually being able to engage when we ask them what their voice is. So again, on that, one of the things that we discovered in our journey is that, which it seems obvious, but our students are going to put their time where they can best get their return on investment, and showing up and giving free advice isn't necessarily got a lot of ROA for them individually. So we looked for ways of how do we engage people that we can pay, i.e. student workers or other types of student compensation ways to be able to value their work in helping us do our work better. So thinking about that.
Awesome. Well, thank you all again so much. It's been a fascinating conversation. I look forward to continuing it, but I'll hand it back over to Cheyenne.
Thank you, Andy, and thanks to panelists for sharing your experiences. I'm not surprised to hear some of the barriers that you all are facing and that you indicated in your registration, but I'm also encouraged to hear the stories and the commitment of leaders like Erica, Alan, and Sheila, and those of you online, those in the chat sharing your stories. So the next panel that I will moderate is titled Partnering to Make Solutions Come to Life. And the reason that this is so well fit into the conversation today is that two organizations on the panel, Charles Koch Foundation and Common Group, have actually come together around the importance of learner voice and the role that philanthropy can play in incentivizing more learner-centric design. So the ideas and the questions at hand and the partnership of the two teams have kind of centered around the Catalyze Challenge, which is a grant competition funding innovative ideas to reimagine education focused on career-connected learning. Catalyze is more than just our two organizations. It's actually a coalition of funders, including the Walton Family Foundation, American Student Assistance, the Joyce Foundation, and two others that are provisionally approved, so I won't name them yet. And Common Group is the implementation partner of the competition. And panelist Rachel Wexler, in her capacity as senior advisor with Common Group, leads the program, which I believe has just closed second round of successful applications. And our other panelist is Brennan Brown, my colleague, and the Director of Partnership Development at the Charles Koch Foundation. So Rachel and Brennan, thank you both for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, Cheyenne. Can I just quickly clarify one thing? The application window is still open. So if you have an idea or you know of someone with an idea, it's a shameless plug to absolutely check out the Catalyze challenge. The application window is open through March 6th. And certainly we are looking to surface all of the innovative transformative models around career connected learning that are in early stages. So we'll get into it, but I just wanted to put a plug, and I will shamelessly put the link to the challenge website in the chat.
That was a perfect plug. That worked.
That was great. And I put the link in the chat. So absolutely, if the applications are still open, that is what this event is for. So hopefully, would love to hear a little bit more. Why don't we just dive in, right? So Rachel, tell us what you're looking for with the Catalyze Challenge and the partnership model, and why and how the Catalyze Challenge kind of came to fruition.
Sure. So I think everyone on this call today would agree that we need to rethink how we as a nation and various organizations and systems across the country are equipping students and with career readiness skills and preparing them for career pathways that allow them to access economic opportunity. COVID did not make this happen. COVID merely and the pandemic have really highlighted a trend that has been or a set of systems and circumstances that have been degrading for the past several decades. And so there's a real need to innovate and to reimagine how we are preparing students and really connecting education with and career. So that's really what we are doing. And if you say, how are we doing it, or what are we looking for? Catalyze is looking for early stage ideas that use career connected learning as a driver. Catalyze is seeking student facing solutions or learner facing solutions that address young people. On one hand, you could call it grades 6 through 14. On the other hand, you could say these are students in the life stages at or around middle school, high school, and transitional post-secondary or career training. And we're largely focused on ideas that can scale and can apply to a broad swath of students, but are really focused initially on servicing students from historically underserved groups or populations within our community who've had historically less access to economic opportunity and meaningful career pathways that would enable them to earn family sustaining wages. I feel like I've talked too much. So Brennan, let me turn it over to you, because it was actually through the course of the learner voice work that Brennan and Andy and others had learned a little bit about Catalyze. And so we are we're thrilled to invite them and to have their participation in the challenge this round.
That's awesome, Rachel. And thanks for sharing. So it's pretty evident why we're so excited about the Catalyze Challenge. Sheila's got me thinking about KFC, so I'm going to try and stay focused. But Catalyze is such a great exemplar of what we're doing at the Charles Koch Foundation, and with a clear connection to learner voice. After all, it's what brought us together. So speaking of Catalyze, we're focused on catalyzing transformation within post-secondary education. And a key part of this, as Ryan mentioned at the top, is about removing the biggest barriers to people reaching their potential. And sometimes the status quo thinking and acting happens to be the biggest barrier. So for example, we're much less focused, let's say, on credit hours, seat time, or even degrees, but where we are focused is on what we believe matters most, the passions, the interests, the aptitudes of the individual learner. I mean, imagine the possibilities if learning was about discovering, developing, and applying your aptitudes. The number of people pushing the boundaries of their potential would be incredible.
Yeah, thank you, Brennan and Rachel. This is such an important part of the conversation because, you know, as much as generating new solutions in the work you're all doing is so important, you can see in the barriers question that it can't happen alone, right? These legacy processes, these entrenched ideologies, you know, comfort with the status quo requires partnerships to get these things moving. And so that's what we hope to do, and that's what we hope this part of the conversation can serve as. So I'd love to just ask you both, what does this look like in action? What is an example of a good partnership, or what does good partnership look like for you? Brennan, why don't you start?
Yeah, you bet. So great question. So I'll tell you what I think the key driver of transformation is, and then go from there. And Todd mentioned it. It's you. It's the education entrepreneur. It's the solution provider. I mean, you all are closest to the problem. You know best what the barriers are. And most of all, best of all, you're willing to do something about it. So, you know, the way we think about it and the role we can play is one of a partner who can help bring your shared vision to life. So broadly, we think about mutually beneficial partnerships in the context of a few things. First would be shared vision. You know, what can we accomplish together in the case of Catalyze, for example, that we couldn't accomplish on our own? Shared principles, absolutely critical. So you heard Rachel describe Catalyze, and for us, the shared principles that really spoke to us were learner voice and transformation, and those were loud and clear. And then third, it's about complementary capabilities. And in many ways, this is where it gets super exciting and where the rubber meets the road, because this is about matching relative strengths of partners in a mutually beneficial way. So that's basically our mental model around what good partnership means. And I think, you know, what it looks like in practice is really important. So when you partner, for example, with the Charles Koch Foundation, there are a lot of tools that we have to help support your vision. And one of the tools is connectedness to a much larger portfolio of education entrepreneurs, folks who are likely wrestling with some of the very same issues you are, or it's knowledge sharing around lessons learned and mistakes made, and what the current landscape of opportunities are, especially in our current state related to out-of-system models. And in some cases, bringing funding to the table that would help bring to life new ideas and scale existing initiatives.
So the way that we've envisioned and that we've designed round 2 of the challenge is to focus the larger grants. Note that Catalyze offers 2 levels of grants. One is a planning grant of up to $50,000, and then the other track is what we're calling an accelerate track that awards grants that are ready to models that are ready to serve students in the next school year, the 2022 to 2023. And those grants are up to $500,000. And in that accelerate track of the up to $500,000, we're looking for ideas along 2 lines. One is ideas that are focused on career identity planning and development, and the others on post-secondary, post-high school transitions. So you ask about what a partnership would really look like. Where we talk about the post-high school transitions, this theme was largely influenced by a report that was put out last summer by JFF called the Blur Report. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, in that there's a real call for policy changes and systems that allow K-12 and post-secondary and career or workforce to not operate in silos, but rather to blur the lines and to start sharing resources. And so that could be an earn and learn solution, where a student is going to school and earning money that defrays the cost of an education and provides really strong work skills, could be a credential. We're looking at different opportunities that would provide an alternative to college, and really be focused on career training. So there are a number of good partnership models, but the idea is really about how do we connect historically distinct systems and get them working together and sharing resources in a way that better prepares students or learners for an economically viable career.
Well, there's been a lot of talk today, and you both mentioned, catering to specific individuals, discover who you are. How can philanthropy be sure that they're taking that approach? And, is there something that philanthropy gets wrong, or a time where you've realized and had to take a step back and say, are we really looking at this from the individual and identity talent development perspective?
That's a really good point, Cheyenne, is that within philanthropy, there are so many intelligent, well-researched, well-read, well-informed, and well-intentioned people who have ideas and really want to see them through. However, we want to, as part of the Learner Voice initiative, we want to ensure that those ideas have been tested and tested or researched with the learners at hand, because we know that when a program or a product is aligned and really resonates with the learner, then that learner will be more deeply engaged, will persist longer, and has a much higher chance of completion. And at the end of the day, the real marker is does that person become employed? Is that person able to support his or her family? And so this is really making sure that the models that we support and we fund are ones that are in demand by the populations that the most well-intentioned people intend to support, to serve.
So what philanthropy gets wrong? Is that the heart of the question, Cheyenne? Well, let me speak to it. Well, first, today or in general, I guess would be my first question, but we'll tackle it. Let me first put out a challenge to the audience here, because something tells me that they might have some better ideas on what philanthropy could do better. So in that spirit, I would love if you would share in the chat one thing broadly that you all think philanthropy could be doing better. And you get 1 point for sharing and 0 points for not. I hope that's enough incentive. But look, I think where we've missed, and use CKF as the example, is perhaps on not taking enough risk relative to the potential impact when it comes to out-of-system transformative ideas, especially in post-secondary ed. And it happens to also be where I see some of our biggest opportunities moving forward. I'll give you a second one too. I think another miss has been prioritizing grant making over other forms of potentially even more valuable partnership. So as I mentioned before, like connections to and knowledge sharing with other education entrepreneurs out there, in many ways that could solve a big gap for an education entrepreneur or a solution provider much better, much faster than even funding could. So those are a couple, but I'm guessing and betting that you all will have some better ideas in there. So please share.
Yeah,
sorry. There's a great comment by Sally Hoffman in the chat, and talking about making assumptions rather than working closely with the people impacted. And one of the key tenets of Catalyze is that we're looking to fund proximate entrepreneurs, and those are people who are really share experience with the communities that they're intending to serve. Oftentimes this is really a shared lived experience, whether it represents the same ethnicity, or maybe it's first generation college students, and somebody who is the first, via a model that was created or designed by someone who was the first first college student in his or her family. And so really making sure that the models that catalyzes funding resonate and hold true and are aligned with the communities they serve is one of the top priorities of the challenge.
Well, this is there's only one comment in the chat so far. I see another one maybe coming through now. So I'll end with the last question of what would both of your, if you could say or have one piece of advice or one ask of the audience and those listening in, what would that be? Brennan?
Sure. Okay. So here's some advice, and it's not necessarily from me. It's channeled through me. So I was on the phone a couple of days ago with a former funder who is now running a pretty large advancement office at a large nonprofit. And she shared that the metrics in the office that they were using almost exclusively were focused on how many RFPs were completed and submitted. And her advice to the team was simple, and I'll share it here. It was stop filling out the form and start a conversation. And I thought, wow, that's pretty good advice. So if I had to pick one piece of advice, that's the thing I would pick. And if I could just squeeze in a quick call to action for the education entrepreneurs out there thinking and acting differently, it would be visit the Charles Koch Foundation website and learn more and pick up the phone and start a conversation.
It's hard to follow on that one, Brendan. But in terms of advice, certainly as the implementation partner, we are learning, we're studying what's happening, and we are doing everything we can not to lead with our own assumptions, but to rely on the research and to really listen to the various funders at the table. I think one of the most compelling ideas from the funder side of Catalyze is that Catalyze is a collaborative funder initiative by 4 and hopefully more philanthropies with varying perspectives. And so really engaging with somebody who thinks about something differently than you do is, and I guess this is somewhat related, Brendan, to what you're saying, but it's really the way to understand what other people are doing, be open to it, and to really start that conversation, because we all have far more common interests, I think, than we often think. And it's really when we're working with people and partners from different, whether it's a different sector or a different perspective or whatnot, that we really push our own ideas and I think make them the most effective. So, if Brendan's going to, his call to action is to send people to the CKF website, I will say, I encourage everyone to go to the Catalyze Challenge website. If you have an idea, we'd love to hear from you. Or if you know people who are working on ideas or even a kernel of an idea, we would love for you to apply. And for those of you who are in the field and might want to become involved with the challenge, there are plenty of ways to do that. We'd also love to hear from you. The challenge is enriched by the number of people and organizations who are involved. And we would love to have a conversation with any of you.
Well, thank you, Rachel and Brennan, for the conversation. I want to say that it is not a plug. It was the purpose of this conversation was to offer partnership, and I think we could stand to do a little bit more listening to the solution providers that we're working with, and that was the goal of this event. So this officially concludes the first part of the event, but I do hope that everyone stays online, and I hope that it sparked a few new ideas so far. But the next part of the conversation, the next hour, we hope we can turn this into action. And this is where we want to really hear from you, and more than just in the chat. So if you can't stay online, I hope that you'll still share your ideas and You can do so by, like Brennan said, reaching out to ckf.org, or I'll put a link here in the chat to kind of a sponsorship or an inquiry form that you can use to reach us and share your ideas. You'll also get that in the post-event email, so no need to use it right now. And then for the next hour, we're going to work in small groups to surface tangible ways for to put learners at the center of your institutions. Facilitator is going to guide us through idea generation exercise and shared discussion focused on removing barriers to implementation at your institutions.